Hey, it's Jeff Hyman, your startup therapist, where we focus on the people part of startups. A fantastic and insightful guest today, Dr. Christopher Croner. Dr. Croner, how are you?
Doing fantastic. How are you, Jeff?
Great. Thank you for joining us. You are the principal of a company based in Chicago called SalesDrive, and we're going to focus today on sales and specifically how to assess and vet and interview sales reps for your startup company. That's going to be our topic today for about the next 15 minutes or so. Dr. Croner, I'm just going to briefly introduce you. You've got just the perfect background for this. Not only have you worked with over 500 or 600 companies worldwide to help them hire and develop a top-performing sales force, but you're also the author of the book, Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again. I love the name of that book, and we're going to learn more about how to not do that. So thanks for joining us. Dr. Croner, why don't you give us 30, 60 seconds on this topic at a high level, what drew you to it, and maybe what some of the key mistakes are, and then we'll get into your key findings and recommendations from there.
Of course. What drew me to the topic is, I think, the frustration that so many companies have when they're hiring salespeople. That process can seem almost annoyingly intuitive, if you will, just difficult to do. And I wanted to find a process scientifically that companies could use step by step on the assessment side and then thereafter on the interview side, that they could have a repeatable process to use to make sure that they're consistently hiring high-performing salespeople. And that's really our focus. How do you find the hunter salespeople of the world? What are the characteristics, the non-teachable characteristics that lead to one's being successful?
So just so I'm clear, we are talking specifically about hunters, not so much farmers or account management people. Is that right for this discussion?
Exactly.
Great. Okay, so hunters are, very hard to find, very hard to hire, very hard to interview. They carry a bag. They are the warriors. They feed us, right, at our startups, especially in a B2B type of startup. What are some of the key things you've learned through the drive test diagnostic that you've developed that are the unteachable characteristics that we have to look for in a successful hunter?
Of course, but there are really three on the hunter side. The first is what we call the need for achievement. And again, when we talk about need for achievement, we're talking about that salesperson that, again, just wants to do well simply for the sake of doing well. They're constantly setting the bar high, jumping over that, setting it higher, as I always say again the next time. Think of not only salespeople, but also entrepreneurs. Many of the folks who are watching right now, we're really looking for that person. Very similar to an entrepreneur who has to get up every morning, make it happen, stand over and watch. That's the first piece, need for achievement. The second piece is competitiveness. And again, competitive salesperson, as I've mentioned in the past, really wants to do two different things. Number one, they want to be the best among their peers. And number two, they want to win the customer over to their point of view. They see that sale as a contest of wills. And then the third piece, of course, optimism, the person who is certain that they will succeed and they are resilient when they have to face the inevitable rejection that a salesperson has to face. It's those three characteristics altogether, need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism, that we like to describe as the perfect storm.
Okay, so you've looked at,
past the age of 21, 22.
I'm sure you've looked at many, many factors, right? You've done assessments and backward regressions, and you found, I just want to be crystal clear about this, because this sounds like it's pretty important, that those three characteristics, competitiveness, the need to achieve, and optimism, are the three non-negotiables.
Exactly.
Now,
exactly.
At what age, well, first of all, are those teachable, or have you concluded in working with companies across the country that they're not teachable, don't even waste your time?
Past the age of 21, 22, there's not a whole lot we're going to do to change those characteristics, especially need for achievement and competitiveness. On the optimism side, yes, you can spend money kind of putting the person on the couch, if you will, for months and months, kind of helping them to build some of that, but most of the companies we work with don't have that time to necessarily spend on therapy, if you will. So we really do tend to look at those as relatively non-teachable past the early 20s.
So these three are the non-negotiables, correct?
Exactly.
And if I can find a hunter candidate with these three things, is it safe to conclude that I could teach her or him everything else necessary to be successful? In other words, they're necessary, but are they sufficient?
They're necessary and sufficient insofar as we have an individual that we're looking to get up to speed over some time, so we have the time to train them, if you will. There are many companies who will say to us, we really need somebody who's going to be producing from day one. In that case, if they need to be producing quickly, then they are necessary, but still not sufficient. In that case, you're going to want to look for the person that has not only the drive, but also the experience to produce. So the key question to ask is, how soon do you need that person to start producing? Is it relatively soon, or can you give them a little bit more time to kind of get up to speed, if you will? Do they have the opportunity to learn sales 101? So I always start out the questioning in that regard at that point. How long do we really have before they really are going to be held accountable for production?
So let's drill into just briefly that experience bucket, because many of the people watching this video are founders of early stage companies. They need to hit the numbers yesterday. They've got investors banging on their head, etc. When it comes to experience, what have you learned, Dr. Croner, about what type of experience? Is it industry experience, a certain number of years? What specifically am I looking for?
Ideally, again, if you want somebody up and running quickly, you will want some industry experience, 2 to 3 years at least. Sometimes people will ask us, for example, what about the person's LinkedIn profile? What about their resume? What things do you look for to help to determine that the person is going to be high in drive? And we find that things like, again, that the person, of course, not being a job hopper, they have some longevity in the positions that they've been in. They're able to give you some sort of evidence that they've been successful previously. Sometimes companies will look for example, a W-2. Sometimes they look for some sort of documentation of percentage attained relative to quota, things like that. They look for, those sorts of stable things in the person's background to help to predict that they're going to be successful thereafter. And then, of course, assessing them, using the drive test to assess, do they have those non-teachable characteristics, those drive characteristics at the same time. They find the combination of experience sort of the perfect storm, as I mentioned, if you will.
I had a Wi-Fi problem, but I think that was on my end, so I apologize. So you mentioned the drive test diagnostic. Let's put that with interviews.
Yes.
Am I doing both? Am I doing one first before the other? And what is the respective role of interviewing hunter candidates versus using a diagnostic, whether it's drive test or some other?
Of course. So we like to look at the assessment process as something that is done prior to the one-on-one interview. Your time is very valuable. So using the assessment can help you up front to really determine, okay, is this person really worth spending that time one-on-one on? And if they are, where do we go during that interview to make the best use of our time, if you will? So we recommend typically starting out with, again, your resume review, then moving on to the phone screen process, and then deciding at that point, do we want to administer the assessment? And then, of course, you have 3 great pieces of data to decide, okay, let's bring the person into the interview and let's structure it accordingly.
Right.
I like to describe, sure.
So just want to get this straight. So it's not a diagnostic such as yours won't necessarily tell me hire or don't hire, but it will certainly tell me don't even waste your time interviewing.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Exactly. I like to characterize it as like having the consumer report, if you will, on
right.
that candidate. It's not the be-all end-all. It just sort of says, hey, buyer beware.
Got it.
Make sure that you spend the time you need to uncover or go into any of the areas that are flagged as red, if you will, on the report, so that you are going into that new hire with your eyes wide open.
So then, presuming they pass muster with the drive test diagnostic, when it comes to interviewing, what types of questions do you recommend or have you found to be most predictive of success that flesh out either those 3 magic characteristics or others?
Of course, we know the best predictor of future behavior is previous behavior. So during that interview process, we're asking for the person to give us consistent examples of things that they have done previously that allow us to predict how they're going to perform for us going forward. So, for example, for something like need for achievement, tell me about the greatest goal you ever accomplished professionally. Really have them flesh that out for you. And you can reflect back to them. You have to be proud of that. How do you intend to top it? Again, the person high in need for achievement has a plan to top it, and they're excited to tell you about it.
Yep.
For optimism, tell me about a time when you remained persistent, even though everyone else around you gave up. Now, tell me about another time. Getting those consistent examples.
Yep. So you're looking not just for one example, but time after time after time.
At least several, yes.
Okay, and the third one. So we talked about
competitiveness.
Yeah.
Tell me about the last time you were competitive at work. What did that look like for you? Or how will your manager describe your competitiveness when I call her or him? After this interview. Again, getting those consistent examples of when the person has shown that characteristic, if you will.
Got it. What do you say to your clients, and I know you've worked with hundreds, who interview sales reps, but they come away saying, you know what? Sales reps, especially hunters, are really good talkers. It's really easy to bullshit me in an interview if you're a good sales rep. So how much weight should I put on the interview knowing that unlike engineering or sales or finance people or HR people, salespeople, they're good talkers?
That's a great point. Sometimes the best sale you ever see out of the person then is in the interview, or the only sale you ever see is
Right.
during the interview. It's all about using that assessment process up front to weed out the folks who may be, again, the clever talkers. The way the test is put together, it's done in such a way that it's designed to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to fake. We use a question format that's designed to eliminate faking called forced choice. So, for example, for each question, the person gets a series of 3 statements, and typically they will all sound positive.
Right.
So again, for example, a question may say something like, I consider myself a leader, I have great relationship skills, I'm very organized. Okay, now which of these is most like you and which is least like you?
Right.
So obviously that then forces the candidate to make some very tough distinctions, but then it gives us a much better sense of their real priorities, and we're constantly monitoring their consistency as they respond to the questions, because as you can imagine, if the person does try to fake the test, it's going to be very difficult for them to remember consistently what they ranked most and least across the entire assessment. So if we do try to do that, we'll flag the reports so the folks that do make it to the interview, they have legitimately passed that test. They've shown strong scores relative to drive. Now you bring them into the interview and start using those behavioral questions in the interview, not letting them kind of BS their way through. Again, as we talk about in the book, kind of that session where you're just sort of sitting there talking about the weather and letting the candidate sort of unleash their canned prepared report, or their canned prepared interview.
Got it. What can I expect, Dr. Croner, in terms of a before and after? I know this is hard to answer, but if I interview randomly, like everyone else does, or if I do it the right way, if I interview hunters as you're describing, with an assessment, with a methodology for the interviews, what might my batting average go from and to, just so I can understand or put a number on whether this is worth the time and money?
Sure, of course. Yeah, our focus is really on bringing in the high-performing athlete at the beginning of the process. So, as you suggest, it can be difficult to exactly quantify that, simply because if we look at ultimate sales production, at the end of the day, there are several elements to the sales ecosystem, if you will, that lead the person to being successful. Things like, again, fit with the company culture, fit with the management style, fit with the compensation plan. All of those things are important at the end of the day. Our focus is really on just getting that high-potential athlete at the beginning of the process. So what you will notice from your perspective is someone who has a great degree of ambition, if you will, moving into that position, a great degree of competitiveness, the person that is ready to hit the ground running and they want to succeed for you. You'll notice a difference. The biggest difference you'll notice is attitude.
Right.
Think of the kid in school that just wants to get an A. That is the biggest thing that you will see, is you have a group of people now that have that attitude that is so rare.
Right.
It's so difficult to find. Sometimes people ask us, what percentage of the population scores high relative to drive? And we find that, again, of the thousands of people we've tested, it tends to be under about 20%.
Got it.
Of course, extrapolating to the population at large, those folks have been screened to some degree before they come to us. It's likely closer to maybe around 16, 17%. So it's just a matter of putting that screening process in place for yourself.
So asking, I guess, the next layer of detail, if I have a 50-50 batting average today at hiring, just rock star hunters,
Mm-hmm.
and I implement this kind of process, this kind of methodology, discipline, and rigor, my 50% batting average, which basically means I hire 2 hunters, one works out, one doesn't,
Yes.
right? What might my batting average go to? I know it's not going to go to 100% perfect, because no one's a perfect recruiter. Could the 50% go to 55% batting average, or where is it possible? What's a reasonable goal to even aspire to?
Of course, in our experience, in terms of my use of the assessment process and interview process, I would say a good goal to aspire to would be between 75 and 80%, especially for folks that are just kind of learning the process, learning the questions that we provide in the book and the step-by-step process, not only during the assessment, but prior to the assessment and after the assessment. It's all about consistency. Your percentage will go up to the extent that you are very consistent and rigorous in the way that you apply these steps. So one bit of guidance that I can provide: move, ideally, the assessment as early as you can during the interview process.
Sure. So I guess then the next question becomes, let's say I have a sales team of 5 folks. I got 1 rock star and 4 that are kind of Do I give them this assessment? And if they don't have all 3 of the key criteria, do I part ways with them under the assumption that they're never going to get there or highly unlikely and I shouldn't have hired them in the first place?
Good question. We never recommend making a hiring decision in that regard, just using the test alone. We really use the test in conjunction with everything else that we know about the person. However, we do have a report called the Production Build Report that's designed for development. So it will give you specific things you can do to mentor or motivate that person, given their unique psychological profile, on characteristics such as persuasiveness, relationship skills, and organizational skills.
Got it. That's part of the same diagnostic? That's a different diagnostic?
That is the exact same test. It's just another report that's available for every drive test you purchase. You also get the production builder report.
Got it. I understand. Very good. Last question is around something I get asked all the time from founders, and that is what credence they should put on seeing the W-2 of the sales rep from last year or the previous company. I want to see your paycheck, or I want to see your standings or your bonus numbers, whatever it might be. How predictive is that of success? Keep setting aside the diagnostic.
Well, it's certainly very helpful. It certainly gives us some evidence to look at. We can talk about well-constructed behavioral interview. The W-2 gives us some concrete evidence of what the person has done previously. That's always helpful, but it's still not the be-all, end-all, because we want to determine, okay, even if the person has been successful previously, are they going to continue to bring that same degree of effort to bear for us? And that's what we want to find out in the interview process. You'll oftentimes see, for example, someone who comes in with a great Rolodex, and they're really sort of touting that as sort of their key thing. They're going to bring this great Rolodex to us, and they're going to mine this for us. Well, that's fine. They can say all that, and they may have great previous results, but we wanted to determine how effective are they going to be for us. So, for example, let's say you have somebody that has a great W-2, but they've done very well at a company that's very large, great degree of collateral material and brand recognition behind them. Okay, that's fine. Now we want to determine the extent to which that previous success is really because of their own effort, or was it because they had all this collateral material?
Or maybe they got lucky. Maybe just one big deal fell in their lap. I call them, bluebirds, and it happens all the time.
Sure.
Right?
That's another important one as well. We always want to, that's the purpose of that behavioral interview. We uncover things.
Got it. Very good. Dr. Croner, this is incredibly useful. I think the key message is to dig beneath the surface of one's numbers and experience to the core DNA of the individual, things that are pretty much hardwired after age 21 from your description. And if you can use a diagnostic or other methodology to nail those, you're going to increase your batting average potentially from 50 to 75%. Huge difference in that's the difference between missing my numbers by a mile or making my numbers and keeping my investors happy.
Exactly.
Great. How can people learn more about you, get in touch, learn more about SalesDrive and the Drive test?
Of course, our website is salesdrive.info. So going to that website, you'll find our contact information, anything that you would need to know about us, a great deal of information about the Drive test, as well as our blog. So again, we invite all of your viewers to tune into salesdrive.info. And if you need to reach me, it's ccroner@salesdrive.info. I'm happy to be of service to your audience in any way that I can.
Great. Dr. Croner, this was incredibly helpful. Thank you for the time.
You're very welcome, Jeff. It's my pleasure, sir.
Thank you.